Welcome back to Digital Visual Effects. We're back in After Effects here, and I want to talk about some specific issues with tracking, namely 3D tracking using the camera tracker in After Effects. Now, there are really a lot of good videos out there, especially on YouTube, that have some great tutorials on how to use this tool. But there are a lot of issues that you can come across and potential problems. And there's a good bit of information out there, but it's kind of in a whole bunch of separate areas and separate videos. And I'd like to see if I could compile all the issues I've come across and techniques and so on into one video here. So let's just start off with doing a little bit of tracking. I've got some footage here I've imported, and I'll just take that and drag it down and make a new composition. So let's have some rulers, zoom in a bit here. There we go. That'll do. Adjust the screen a bit. Okay, now just kind of playing through this, when we see what's happening, there's a lot going on here. And there's a lot of movement. You're not really going to be able to, at least in my experience, do some successful tracking where there's this much movement of the camera. So look at all this. You want to kind of reduce it down a bit, all the stuff that the tracker has to work with. Generally speaking, special effects shots are done in little segments, and this might be too much to work with, at least for After Effects tools. Now, I've done some test tracking kind of right at this area to try and pull a 3D track off of here, and also some kind of right here at the beginning as well. So I want to show you what you might want to do. We've got, a decent amount of footage here. It's not a whole lot. If I go in here and I interpret the footage and take a look at this, I interpreted, of course, at 24 frames a second. I'm going to override the start time code, maybe tell it to be 0 and say OK. And anyway, if you've got too much to work with here, and especially if it's a long bit of footage, it might take a long time to track, you might get errors. What I would suggest is that let's pull this up some here, there we go. That I'm going to double click this and actually go right into the footage and trim the footage here. So if I'm pulling the playhead and going along here, I'm looking for some consistent areas in the back. So as I pull this along, kind of like that, and it moves along, we'll go to, I'll say about there. And right here in the footage itself, I can trim it. Notice how I grabbed its duration here. I'm just pulling it in to set this end mark. Notice how my composition, it gets trimmed down as well. Let's go back into the composition. And we'll go back here to the start. There we go. And I'll need my trackers. So here, of course, we have the tracking tools. And we're going to do track camera. And this is a 3D tracking as opposed to some of the other ones here. So I'll just click here, track camera. And it should start doing this. This will take a while. So I apologize for that. But you'll see this right here, analyzing in background. And we can see that it's doing some stuff up here. There we go, it's finally moving. So it'll give you kind of a percentage here as it's going along, pretty nice. And once it's done that, it kind of solves the camera. And you'll see these points right along here, and that shows you that it's tracked. So as I move along here, there we go. It's of course looking for areas that, it's looking for areas where it sees pixels of different color and it's following their movement. Now, what you might not know right away here is that there's a problem with this. All these little X's where it's tracking, finding little tracking markers or trying to make up its own, they're not really doing a whole lot. As I'm moving my cursor along, I'm wanting to see this target changing in size and angle as it's going along the background. What's happened here, especially if you look, there's a little message on this. It says the depth, no depth from a tripod pan solve. What that means is that the 3D tracker, and that's what it is, a 3D camera tracker, it hasn't been able to pull any 3D information out of this. It hasn't seen enough parallax to be able to calculate depth. And that's why all these little X's here are the same size. And this would actually, if you see this, it's kind of a problem. You want to see different size X's. Ones that are closer to the camera are going to be bigger. Ones that are farther away should be smaller. And that's what you'll see in a successful 3D track. I'm not seeing this here. It has tracked it, but it hasn't given me any 3D information. And that's part of the problem. So if you ever see this no depth from a tripod pan solve, that's what it means, that After Effects hasn't found enough parallax to give you any 3D stuff. So I can't, for example, effectively track anything and stick it along this door or maybe along the ground here because there's no 3D information. Now you could, of course, click something and you could pin something to it. You could do a 2D track with this, but it's about the same as doing track motion. So this, I would say, is not a successful track, especially for a 3D camera track, which is what we're trying to get here. Now you can do a few things here with this. If we look at shot type, it says fixed angle of view. And you can change a few things here. Let me look at advanced, solve method. It says auto detect. And so that's what your default is. But if I tell it these other methods, it might try and figure out a bit more 3D information. So let me just show you, there are some examples here. Also, my experience has been that track the same footage twice, you get kind of two different solutions. A few things that we're looking for: average error, 1.75 pixels. That's a bit of a high rate of error, which means that we're not going to get a really good, solid track pinned to this background here. So you want to look at your error there. But I'm going to change this here to mostly flat scene. As I do that, it's going to resolve the camera. And so as I'm looking at this, I'm actually getting some targets here, and it's of course looking for 3 different points to triangulate. And you can actually click and shift click to choose the points to triangulate on. So it's getting me some information there. It still doesn't quite look right. And so as I go through this footage here, as I'm looking for stuff, this is and not really a great tracking setup here. And like I said, this might be something where you have more of a 2D kind of tracking situation. But I just wanted to let you know the kinds of problems you could come across. Now, actually, look right here. I've got using these particular targets right there. I've got something that might work. That target looks like it's kind of flat there on the ground, so it's given me some better tracking information. And that was with the same footage and changing nothing here, the same tracking tools, but just changing the solve method. So that may be something you want to look at if you're not getting good tracking information right there. And you see I'm not getting that same error message. Some of these really aren't that accurate. But like I say, right there looks like that could be a pretty good one. Also notice, look at my error. Average error is 0.30 pixels. Now that's actually really good. Anything under 1 pixel is a pretty good error to have. Just by changing the solve method, I do have what could be a much better track. So if I wanted to put something on the ground here, yeah, that could be a good way to go. See, right about there. And as I'm looking along here, here's this sign. If I want to put something on the sign, that right there could be a good track to kind of match up with the sign. And so we'll just kind of go through the footage here a little bit, looking for places to track. You can see there's still not a whole lot of parallax going on, so there's not a whole lot of 3D stuff here. If I want to put something on the ground here, there's not a lot of good information along there. Now keep in mind that you can, let's try this, click a point, and then I'm going to shift click that point and that point, and you see now it's actually being able to triangulate, and it's giving me a target right there. That's still not quite right. I can see it doesn't quite fit the angle of the ground, but you can see sort of what you can do here. as it looks like this might be more of a 2D scene to track, or maybe something that After Effects just doesn't like that much. But you can see how you can do a little bit here to give you a better chance at tracking, and you also want to check some of these controls, especially advanced. That average error you always want to check. So let's try something else here as well. I'm going to make a whole new project and import some footage. And let's see here. I'll just I've got something ready here, and open up this QuickTime movie. There we go, and drag it down there to make a composition. Okay, so I'm going to show my rulers. Command R, as I always want to show the rulers. So you got a good size here, 1920 by 1080. And remember, when you're going to track, don't just grab a piece of footage and start tracking. What you really want to do is you want to play through the footage first and look for a good bit to track. Notice all the camera movement here. As the camera comes in here and it swings in close on the subject and goes around like that. So now we've lost a lot of that data. So this extreme camera movement where you're losing your initial points to track, it's not really going to be very helpful. Again, we've got some good stuff here that might track. As it's coming here, now we've lost all that. And we go along here, so I want to narrow this footage down to find, some area I can track. As I look at this, it's a good chunk of footage as well. It's looks like it's about 50 seconds. Now that's a lot, and so I'm going to just trim this down to track it like the previous one. So I'll double click on the footage, go into the footage itself, out of the composition, and then just pull its end time here to about 15 seconds. And so we'll just track this bit right here. So I'll go back into the composition, and I'll hit home to go to the very first frame. Okay, so what I'm hoping here is it's going to find some things to track. Now, of course, the best way to do this is to do it right during the production when it's actually being shot. So if this scene had been made for tracking, you'd have tracking markers, little bits of brightly colored tape right here on the wall, and that's what the tracker would see very easily to pick up on. So this doesn't have that. We're just using this as an example. What I'm hoping is that there's enough contrast to some of these parts here that it will kind of make it work. So here's my track camera. I'm at the first frame, and I'll just click that. And I guess I could have been explaining all these things here while I was tracking to save some time. But remember, you want to work in short little chunks for the most part. Even working on big productions, VFX studios, when you're given a shot, it's usually only a few seconds, a bit at a time. And of course, a lot of people working together are making that happen. But very common to work on little segments. And in my VFX classes, when I make assignments, I'm generally telling students to give me 10 seconds of a shot or less. So between 5 and 10 seconds, depending upon the technique that they're showing me here. So of course it's going to do the same sort of thing. Notice how I haven't changed anything here. I'm using all the default settings. It's counting down the percentage done there. So there's some time remaining, and there it shows you how many frames it's tracked. So I'm doing 360 frames, and it's 71%. So working along okay. I like that countdown there that shows you the status. We'll look at the advanced here, and there's that auto detect, which we'll see how that works for us. And it's kind of a good thing to do to just do that auto detect right there and see what it gives you. So now it's solving the camera, and we'll see the track points that it's going to come up with. Okay, so this looks like it's a lot more successful. Now notice that the greatest contrast here is, of course, on the model, and it's really picked those out. Now we're not going to, of course, pin something on her. That's not usually the part of planar tracking like this. But I want to show you something, how we have these large tracking X's here, and we have small ones here in the background. This is actually the mark of a successful track. This is what you want to see. What this means then is that After Effects has figured out, based on the movement here in the model and the movement in the background, it's actually calculated depth. So these small tracks here in the background are actually shown as being farther away. So If I look through the footage here, I can see these tracking markers and the variety of sizes here. There's a big one, there's a medium-sized one, there's a really tiny one. That's kind of what I want to see. So that shows me that it has calculated some 3D specifics, some depth to the scene. So good stuff right there. So if you have a good track, and that's really what it's all about, and this is, of course, a technique that's referred to as match moving if you're doing, heavy-duty visual effects work. When you have a good track first, now you're going to start with some markers here, and try and put stuff on the wall. As I'm looking here and putting my cursor along here, I'm getting what looks like to be, I think, a really very accurate, track there. Imagine if you had that round target on the wall, what would it look like? See if I can find a bad one. There it's kind of a little bit angled. See, that's no good. But something like that looks pretty good. So that's kind of what I'm looking to see here. So I'm going to go back to the first frame here. Find one that looks good. And again, notice how it's triangulating. It gets at least 3 track points and it's triangulating. And I'm going to take what it's getting here because that looks good to me. Of course, as I mentioned, you can shift click and pick 3 points to have it, do a sort of manual triangulation. But I like this right here. And so if I like that and I say, we're going to start with this bit, I'm going to right click on it and choose create solid and camera. Now, of course, I could do a text, but I'm going to do a solid, which I could put anything into. So create solid and camera. Okay, great. So there's my solid. So let's put it right there on the wall. And if I open up my my layers here a little bit more, come on. There we go. You can see that I've got a 3D tracker camera, and I've got the track solid. So click on that. There's my solid, and there's the tracking camera. And just to show you this is a 3D space, if I click here where it says active camera, I can take a look at it in various sort of dimensions around. So if I go to the top, what it's showing me here is, there we go. There's the camera. See that? There's the camera moving through the scene. Right? Really interesting there. And so that's if you were on the very top of it looking down. If I click on this track solid, the solid's in there. Usually you're going to want to look at this, active camera right there. So we're back in with that. Okay, so I want to click on this, and notice that if you open up the properties and look at transform, and you look at things like anchor point, position, scale, and orientation, you'll see instead of instead of 2 numbers or coordinates, you now have 3. And that's because this is in 3D space. You have X, Y, and Z. So if you're familiar with 3D programs, that lets you know that After Effects is thinking in 3 dimensions now, 3 axes. And that's why you'd have these, and it's going to make it really helpful for you. So let's kind of see what's happened here. Now I want to click on this and I want to adjust this because it looks like it's on the wall. It looks pretty good. But if I'm using these concrete kind of blocks, I guess, as a guide, maybe I want to replace one. It doesn't quite fit in there. See how it's kind of turned a little bit? Well, that's easy enough to fix. But I want to show something here. And if you're something that you're kind of missing out on, I think I'm missing out on something. Let's see, click off of this. There we go. Kind of weird I have to click off the layer. I'm going to go to View Options under View right here. There we are. And for some reason, my After Effects keeps turning this off. What I really want here is handles. So I'll click on that and I'll say OK. Now when I click on this solid, look what I get. Very handy. What I can see is I've got 3 handles, X, Y, and Z. And this is so useful because X, Y, and Z, even in 3D programs, they're generally displayed as specific colors. So the Y is green, and the X is red, and the Z is blue. So that's really helpful to let you know what's going on. Now we've got this solid here, and it's just kind of a square really. And there are a couple things you can do. Obviously, this is just a placeholder. And if I want to see through this, I could just hit T for opacity and take the opacity down. And now I can see, some of the texture through it. That could be very handy. But it's just a solid sitting there in 3D space. So let me see here with the handles active. If I go back to look at my top, and if I zoom out here, let's see. There's the camera. So I guess the solid is right about there. It kind of throws you off. It has this little bit here you think is the image, and it's not. It's kind of a weird little thing there. So anyway, I'm going to go back to my active camera, which is probably where you're going to do most of your work here. So a couple things here I want to show you is obviously you're going to want to replace this. And there are a couple ways you can do this. Obviously, you would come in here and you would import something. So you're going to import artwork or whatever. This is where you could do matte painting and then attach the matte painting to the track with the background here. You could actually kind of import something and then option drag it and drop it right on top of this. But what I like to do with these, which is a really good thing to do, is I like to pre-comp this solid. It's a really nice thing to do. So if I right click on this and I do pre-compose, so we're going to make its own little composition here. And I'm going to keep all of its attributes right out here. And so the attributes would be any changes or transformations or stuff going on. So right now I'm going to leave all that here. You do have the option, you can kind of stick it and move attributes into the new composition. Well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave it out here, and hopefully that'll make some sense in a moment. So then I will say, OK. Now we've got this, this little composition here sitting right here on the wall. And of course, it's not moving, but it's the camera. See, the camera is moving, and it should be moving along here with the footage. And I didn't check this. Let's go here. Notice that I should have checked that the tracking to see what my attributes were. Let's click on this again, and we'll go to the effects controls. And looking at my average error, ooh, that's 1.8 pixels. That's not too cool. It's a little too high, more than I would like. But we'll see what happens there. We'll see kind of how this goes. Again, that was the auto detect. I could try another one here. Again, mostly flat scene for this, but we'll see. Maybe we'll see how the auto detect works. But just to let you know that average error is a little higher than I would like. Okay, so we've got our comp here. I just want to show you what happens. So I'm going to double click on this comp, and now we're in the comp. And of course, the cool thing here is the comp is completely flat. So that's really handy. It's really cool because any artwork you're going to create, or even say like a video image or an animation, whatever, to pop in there, you're going to do it flat. And then because it's in 3D space, as the camera moves, it'll fit in and move with the scene. But notice what it's done is it's giving me a composition. And if I go here and look at its settings, there we go. Okay, it's 1,000 by 1,000 pixels. And probably you're not really going to want a composition that is, square, 1,000 by 1,000 pixels. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just take its width. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, it's 1080, not 1,000. Excuse me. Shouldn't see that. Yeah, 1080. So I'm going to take its width and just maybe, double that. So maybe 2160, right? And I'll say OK. So now you see I've doubled that composition. Now this is the solid sitting right there. So I would need to, I'll hit S for scale, and I'm going to uncheck those attributes there. And for the X, I'm going to do 200%. And see now I've scaled up that that solid so it fills that range there. Now let me show you something else. What's often done for tracking, as you're putting in placeholders to check the movement, a very common thing to do is to do a grid. So what I might do here on this solid here is go up to Effect and Generate and do a checkerboard. So if I do that, there's my checkerboard. Ooh, that doesn't look good. Size. Okay. So So there's the checkerboard right there. And I'm just going to do a new solid here. So layer, new, and solid. And I'll make that, I'll just kind of keep this traditional. Usually it's a black and white checkerboard. So I'll say OK and OK. And of course, pop that underneath. So now you can see I've got a checkerboard going. And, you know, there we have it. So if you go back into your main composition, let's go back here, model track. There we go. So there's the checkerboard sitting on the wall there. And often a match move artist is going to do something like this, and just kind of the job of a match move artist is to get the data correct and fitting in there, right? So that it's the track is good and smooth, and that work gets enough to someone else. So it's very common to do this with a checkerboard. So let me show you a couple things we can do here. First of all, I can see that there's it's not quite fitting in with the rotation here. I want to fit this in, say, to one of these blocks, and make that, you know, kind of fill this area here. So here's my my checkerboard here. So if I go to transform, I can do a few things here. I'm going to go to orientation. Oddly enough, it's not rotation. Orientation seems to work better. And see, I've got these 3 coordinates. It's actually X, Y, and Z. And I want to rotate this around, I think it looks like I need to rotate around the X. So if I come over here and I rotate that, see what's happening? I'm trying to get that so that it matches vertically this line right here. And then how about position? So I can move it X, Y, and Z. So seeing that if Z is along this way, right? So remember, you just have to remember what these are, X, Y, and Z. If I do this, I'm going to kind of slide it along there. There we go. And so I'm sliding it along like that. Okay, that's good. And what if I scale it? So let's take the scale. Notice there's that you've got 3 ways you can scale it, 3 dimensions. But this really is kind of a 2D object, so scaling in Z isn't going to help. But I'm just going to grab here and scale it up, maybe 200%. So see, I'll scale it up to fit in there. And now I'm going to take the position and move it. So again, scaling along that X, right along there. Or excuse me, sliding. And now I'll scale along move along the Y. See, I'm trying to move it along here, move it along that Y, so that it fits right in there. And what I'm noticing here is that it's kind of lined up here, but see how it's not quite fitting in there? It's almost like it's sort of tilted forward, and it actually is. So I need to change its orientation again. I think I'm going to rotate around the Z. So if I come to orientation, there's X, Y, and Z. I'm going to rotate it a little bit this way. Oh, didn't like that. Orientation. Let's try this one. Okay. Oh, wait, X. So let's try that. That's Y. Wait. I think with this one now I might actually do a little bit of rotation. So let's see here. Ah, there we go. So I'm going to rotate that. See that right there? So I've rotated that. And now it looks like it's matching up, you know, fairly well with that side. So if I take and I scale it a bit more, scale it up, and I'll change the position. Let's move it up a bit. So right about there. All right. So now it kind of looks like it fits in place. And then of course I could do just take the opacity down a little bit so you can kind of see through it. And that helps you to see how it's moving along here. Okay, so let's go to the first frame here. And so notice as I'm moving this along, you know, for a good bit of time, it's actually moving quite well. I would say that this is really, at this point here, it looks like it's nicely tracked. And so I'm wondering, it looks like it's kind of nicely tracked. Notice how here it goes out of focus as the camera goes out of focus. So if you were putting something here as you replace it in that composition, out here in this composition, the main comp, you would need to animate, say, a camera lens blur to try and match this. And that's just one of those little subtle things as it's a kind of a compositing issue, just to make sure it really looks good. So as I'm coming along here, the track is looking pretty good. I'm just kind of going through this frame by frame. And I can sort of look through here, see as I took the opacity down right in this little dark black check of the checkerboard, I can see that little spot of the concrete there. And that's kind of a good little reference point to see. So all that is looking pretty good, right? Now as it moves along here, what you might see because of that error, it's starting to slide. I can see that it's starting to slide a bit. And then I'm losing where it's supposed to be sticking right here. So if I get all the way out to here, whoa. See if we can have that move there. So there it is. It's starting to kind of slip a little bit. And I think it's, slipped a bit more. So I think that line was right about here. And of course, if you were putting something in here, you'd want to make sure for that layer, you check the option to have motion blur happening, for that layer. As the camera moves really quickly, it'll add motion blur to it. But overall, this is pretty good. You could try and kind of cheat this a little bit by saying, okay, I know it's supposed to end up about here. Like, for example, that's the edge of that concrete block it should be in, and it hasn't really fit. So you could actually, in the position, you could turn on the stopwatch to keyframe and kind of keyframe and sort of maybe slide it along the wall to try and make up for the sliding that the lack of an accurate track is given. So, I mean, not a great idea, but a little cheat to sort of keep in mind. But what I want to show you is that right about in this area here, it's pretty good track. That looks pretty solid. And again, you could, pop anything you wanted in there. Again, double click, and there's your composition sitting right there. And it's, of course, 2160 by 1080. That's the size. But you can adjust it, right here. Change any change you make here with these composition settings will adjust its size out here in the main composition. So for example, if I want to do something that was long like this block right here, I would think, that's probably twice that length again. I would double click on this, come to this composition, come to these composition settings, and then double this number again right there. So, and it would be 4,320, right? Anyway, so these are some basics on how to try and get this to work. Like I say, from here to here, I think is a really good track. I'm liking how that's looking. It's just as we get the extreme camera motion, say, starting around here, that's when it starts sliding off. Now I've got one item in here, and remember, anything can be put in here. So it could be matte painting. It could be any kind of image created in Photoshop, a poster, a graffiti, graphic, whatever that you put on the wall. It could be a movie. It could have animated frames. It could be like some type of screen here with some animated messaging or something. It could even be motion graphics you create in After Effects. Remember, when you go into this composition, you've got this complete composition to work with its own timeline, its own layers, and you're working all nice and flat. So you could pretty much do anything you wanted to right in here. Pretty cool stuff. I wanted to show you just one more thing here. If I click back here on the model track movie here, you can actually add more items to track in. So I could come over here and add something else, and just kind of think about this this error. There's that auto detect, and this this piece is already created here. And remember, it's not moving. It's the camera that's moving around here, which is why it's a 3D camera tracker. It makes that 3D animated camera to make up for what's happening here. So if this auto detect isn't working, I could try a typical, and let's just see what it does here when it solves, this camera. Okay, look at that. That average error is 1.71. So that's a little bit better, not much. Notice how it still has these smaller, far away points here and these larger ones here. So that's all good. I wonder if I go to mostly flat scene and see what that does. So again, if you're not getting a really high level, a good bit of error, I guess if you're not getting a low error, if the error is too high, you can try these different options here. Okay, so this one has given me 1.63. And notice how here, when I say mostly flat scene, it's actually given more of the points right here on this wall, and there are actually fewer here on the model. So I have more points here to choose from. The error is down. It's a little more than I would like, but it is a little bit better. So notice that even though I've got that camera and this 3D composition already there, that's going to update and move along with things here. So just try and see what you can get here, and it's at times it's a little bit of a trial and error, and of course this is not what After Effects is really made to do 100%, but you can do a decent job if you work with it. Well, how is that? So I'm not sure that I like this mostly flat scene here. Just for fun, I'll try the tripod pan and see what that gives me. Okay, so again, there's that no depth from a tripod pan solve. So that's not going to be very helpful at all. I'm going to go back to, let's see, typical. And I want to see that. I want to see the points that I have there. Okay. Now I've got some points here along this, kind of along here, right? And oh wait, there we go. Okay, I kind of like that. So if I was going to put something along that wall, I want to look for something to be fairly flat. So it's not as flat as I would like, but it's about maybe as flat as I can get. So I would come right here and there we go, right click. And now I'm going to, again, create that, solid in camera. Now, ideally, when it's all done, because I've already created a camera, it would just say, create a solid, because the camera is already there. So there's my 3D camera. Generally speaking, I don't want two cameras there. I don't want to tell it to generate another one. So if I go back to auto detect, and I've been kind of messing around with this scene, doing a whole bunch of stuff. And let's just see what we get here again. Now we're back to 180. But let's see. Okay, there we go. See, I kind of like that right there. So I would, create a new solid. And usually the best thing to do is to kind of create these solids right away. And then ideally you want just that one camera, and then you can have a whole bunch of solids, and they're all going to be using that 3D information from the one camera. But I hope that this has been helpful to kind of show you some of the pitfalls of the 3D camera tracker and how you can get beyond them. What you're trying to see and look for to tell you that your track is successful. But any questions, let me know. We've been dealing with this in my class currently, and this is probably one of the more complex ways to track in After Effects. And that also means it's the one that has the most possibility for error, and you got to kind of really fine tune it and make it happen. So hope that this is helpful. And if you're ever having problems with this particular tool, as it's kind of finicky, maybe these will show you some points where you can you can figure it out and make it work better for you. Until next time.